Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm a Terry Pratchett fan. In his This World series, wizards and witches know exactly when they are going to die. They can invite their friends, throw a party, dress themselves up in their favorite clothes, and calmly step into their final resting place. For mere mortals like us, unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. We have to live with the huge inconvenience of trying to guess as best as we can when our day might come. And one of the most important data points we use to make that educated guess is life expectancy. Is this magic number that shapes how we think about aging and retirement, how long your retirement might last, how big your nest egg needs to be, things like CPF life, safe withdrawal rates, how freely we feel we can spend our money, and everything that comes with it. But from the comments on this channel, I realized something. A lot of the disagreement isn't because people don't know what life expectancy is. It's because we often talk past one another. Some people say most people don't even live past 70. Others say if you don't plan for 90, you are being negligent. And sometimes the language gets a little bit colorful. So today, I hoped to provide some clarity and indirectly lower the noise level around life expectancy, not just on this channel, but more broadly across YouTube and other discussions. I also want to take this opportunity to talk about something our health minister, Mr. Ong Ye Kung, mentions very often, Healthspan. The technical term for it is health adjusted life expectancy, or HALE for short. As usual, I'll break this video into three parts. First, I'll share some findings from my research on life expectancy. Then for part 2, we'll shift the focus to health span. And finally, part 3, I'll share my personal take on how to think about all this. Let's get started. Most of us instinctively know what life expectancy means. It's a number in years that tell us how long a Singaporean is expected to live. But it's important to understand how this number is calculated. Life expectancy doesn't come from guesswork or from averaging out how long people feel they'll live. It's calculated using something called period life tables, statistical tables built from the current death rates at each age. And our Department of Statistics, or DOS, publicly published this for Singaporeans to see. It doesn't assume future medical breakthroughs, new drugs, policy changes, or pandemics. It simply describes current mortality conditions. That's why when something major happens like COVID, life expectancy drops. So, life expectancy is a population level snapshot of today's world, not a prediction of how long you or I will personally live. When you see life expectancy reported in the media, say the Straits Times, it's almost always life expectancy at birth. But when gerontologists or retirement planners talk about life expectancy, they are often referring to a different number, life expectancy at 65. Eh? What's the difference between the two? Now, let me explain using the 2023-2024 complete life tables from the DOS. Look at the first row. The number at the far right is life expectancy at birth, 83.2 years. Now, look at the second row. For people who are already 1 year old, the number in the last column actually decreases to 82.4. So what's happening here? You see, that second row doesn't mean a 1 year old lives 82.4 years in total. It means that a 1 year old is expected to live 82.4 more years. So their total expected lifespan is actually 83.4, slightly higher than a newborn. Many people may not know this, but infants in their first year of life is most vulnerable and death rate is disproportionately high compared to later ages. That's why all countries and WHO track this closely, and we call it infant mortality rate, or IMR. In the table, you can actually see it. The number of deaths in the first year, 217, is almost 20 times higher than in the next few rows. And by the way, Singapore has one of the lowest infant mortality rates in the whole world. What this means is that life expectancy can go up because fewer infants die in the first year, not necessarily because people are living longer in old age. When a country improves obstetrics, neonatal care, and infant health, life expectancy at birth rises rapidly. Now, for retirement planning, life expectancy at birth is actually not the most useful number. What matters more is life expectancy at 65. So let's jump to the age 65 in the same table. The number in the last column is 20.9. That means someone who reaches 65 is expected to live another 20.9 years. Add the two together and you get 85.9, almost 86. That's about 3 years longer than life expectancy at birth. And the reason is simple. By the time someone reaches 65, they have already survived the high-risk first year of life, accidents, illnesses in the preceding 64 years. They are, statistically speaking, a survivor group. So if you use 83 instead of 86 when planning retirement, you are likely underestimating how long money needs to last. That's why in all my CPF Life discussions, I use 86, not 83. Next, I want to address a frequently asked question. How fast is life expectancy increasing? I looked at the life tables from 2003 to 2024 for Singapore. The rate of increase in life expectancy is slowing down. For the decade from 2003 to 2013, life expectancy at birth increased by 3.3 years. From 2013 to 2023, it increased only by 0.8. Now, we have to be careful with the 2023 number, as COVID put life expectancy down worldwide, not just in Singapore. So that 0.8 is likely understated. But even before COVID, many developed countries were already seeing life expectancy stagnate. Given this trend in comparable countries, I think a reasonable estimate going forward is an increase of about 1.5 to 2.5 years per decade for life expectancy at birth. So what about life expectancy at 65? From 2003 to 2013, life expectancy at 65 in Singapore increased from 83 to 85.4, a gain of 2.4 years. From 2013 to 2023, it increased by just 0.5 years. So the rate of increase is lower than life expectancy at birth, which is expected because the infant mortality rate is not a factor here. Again, adjusting for COVID, a reasonable range might be 1.3 to 2 years increase per decade for LE at 65. So how do I apply this estimation to myself personally? I'm 53 this year, so in about a decade or so, when I reach 65, my planning parameter shouldn't be 86 anymore. It should be 88 or 89. Before I wrap up, there's one final thing I really want to talk about for life expectancy: gender difference. Women live longer on average, and that changes retirement planning in a very real way, especially for married couples and single independent females. But it deserves a proper discussion, not a rushed paragraph. So I'm splitting it out into next week's video to give it the attention it deserves. Next, let's talk about health adjusted life expectancy, HALE, or Healthspan as is known to the general public. I know what some of you are thinking. Healthspan. Is this one of those fancy buzzwords? How do you even define healthy? If I've got diabetes or high cholesterol, but I'm still living a normal life, am I healthy or not? Hear me out. HALE or Healthspan is not a new idea. Even though HALE has only entered public consciousness recently, largely because the whole world is aging, this idea actually goes back 55 years to 1971. A researcher named Daniel Sullivan asked a very simple question. Is counting deaths alone enough to describe population health? Sullivan felt something important was missing. People don't live perfectly healthy, then suddenly drop dead one day, like the wizards and witches in Terry Pratchett's world, even though that's probably everyone's secret wish. The odds of that happening are probably lower than striking first prize in 4D. Most people live with conditions, sometimes for decades. So what Sullivan did was actually quite elegant. He started with a standard period life table, the same one that I showed earlier, and then he asked, at each age, how healthy is the average person? So instead of counting every year of life as a full year, he adjusted each year based on health. Years lived in full health count as one. Years lived with illness or disability count as less than one, depending on severity. That's the basic idea behind HALE. The hard part is figuring out how much to adjust, and this is where the heavy lifting happens. Researchers don't just label people as healthy or not healthy. In the massive Global Burden of Disease Study 2010, researchers first identified 289 diseases and injuries. Then they looked at the real-life effects of those conditions, medically termed as sequelae, things like diabetes leading to kidney failure requiring dialysis, amputations affecting mobility, etc. These 289 diseases translated into about 1,160 distinct sequelae, which were then grouped into 220 distinct health states, and each health state is assigned a disability weight. Mild conditions like hearing loss carry a smaller weight like 0.9. Severe limitations like being unable to eat or dress independently carry much heavier weight like 0.6 or 0.5. And these weights are not random. They are derived from over 100,000 data sources worldwide, including patient and caregiver surveys, hospital records, and government health surveillance systems. And in the more recent Global Burden of Disease 2021 edition, they went one step further. They explicitly modeled multiple conditions in the same person, because that's what real-world aging actually looks like. So HALE isn't a vibe. It is cold hard data condensed into a single number so that normal people like us can actually use it. In many ways, it's even more important than lifespan, especially for retirement planning and caregiving decisions. So, what do the numbers actually look like in Singapore? Overall life expectancy at birth is about 83.5 as mentioned earlier. Health adjusted life expectancy, HALE, is about 74 years. That means on average, we spend roughly 9 to 10 years in poorer health. If you break it down by gender, for men, life expectancy is about 81, HALE is about 73, so roughly 8 years are spent in ill health. For women, life expectancy is higher, about 85.5. HALE is about 75, which means about 10 to 11 years are spent in ill health. So yes, women live 4.5 years longer, but they also tend to spend 2.5 more years in poorer health. For context, that 9 to 10 years Singaporeans spend in ill health is actually among the best in the world. Whether we can shorten it further, honestly, no one really knows. because no country in the world has done it yet. So being in the lead, there's no one to pace. We are running our own race. Most studies shows that for every year of increase in lifespan, health span increases by only about 10 months, which means the gap actually widens over time, what gerontologists call an expansion of morbidity. With that, let me move on to the final part and share some of my personal thoughts. Number one, let me start with my thoughts on how health span impacts retirement planning. I often hear people on YouTube say things like, I want to live until 90 or 95. That's old thinking. It focuses only on life expectancy. HALE forces us to ask a different question. How many healthy years am I actually going to get in retirement? Most of those healthy years sit right at the front end of retirement, and you don't actually have that long. If you retire at 65 and the current HALE is around 75, you really only have about 10 disability-free years. Now imagine you delay CPF life from 65 to 70 and fund the first 5 years of retirement using non-CPF assets. The real question then becomes, will you feel psychologically free enough to spend and enjoy those early, healthier years? From both studies and anecdotal sharing by retirees online, the answer is often not really. Switching from accumulation mode to decumulation mode is surprisingly hard. That's just human psychology. On the other hand, if you already have a regular income stream coming in, like CPF Life, people tend to feel more comfortable decumulating, spending a bit more freely, creating memories, and actually converting time affluence into time dividends. So, when HALE is around 75, delaying payouts can mean cutting a decade of healthier retirement down to just half a decade. Now, there's a very valid concern I hear all the time. What about care costs when I become unhealthy? I don't want to be a financial burden to my caregivers. That concern is absolutely legitimate, and I covered it in detail in a video a couple of weeks ago. I leave a link below. So yes, I can see the logic in delaying payouts to 70 if part of that regular income is meant to fund long-term care. As I always say on this channel, we are heterogeneous. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. My intention here isn't to prescribe a solution. It's simply to highlight the trade-offs so we can make more informed decisions. Number two, our conversations about life expectancy need to change. Let me give you two examples. A fairly recent American study with the rather provocative title 10 Americas, published in The Lancet, showed that life expectancy can differ dramatically depending on ethnicity and where people live. Let me flash the life expectancy charts from that study on the screen. What you'll see is that these 10 groups of Americans experience very different life expectancies. Around the year 2000, the gap between the top and bottom groups was already around 15 years. By the 2020s, as the different groups experience very different outcomes from the COVID pandemic, that gap has widened further to almost 20 years. I also found a UK study that looked at the London population using postcode as a proxy for socio-economic status. The findings were staggering. In 2002, the gap in life expectancy between the top 2.5% and the bottom 2.5% was about 11 years. By 2019, that gap has widened dramatically to 17 years for males and 19 years for females. What studies like this tell us is that national life expectancy averages can be deeply misleading. Life expectancy can vary enormously by location, ethnicity, and social economic status, sometimes so much that it almost looks like different countries within the same country, or in London's case, the same city. I tried to find similar breakdowns for Singapore to see if we have our own set of different little red dots. My first attempt didn't yield much, but I'll keep reading and sharing what I find on this channel. However, online and on this channel, what I see are two very loud camps. One convinced that everyone will die before 70, and another convinced that we are all going to go past 100. And what I'm trying to show with data is that both may be right. Let me bring this back to a personal level, because this is where life expectancy stops being an abstract number and starts becoming a personal decision. On my father's side, both my grandparents live into their 80s. On my mother's side, my grandfather passed away earlier in his 60s, but my maternal grandmother lived into her 90s. Both my parents are now in their 80s. My mother's health has declined quite rapidly, while my father, on the other hand, is still extremely healthy. So when I look at my own situation with all this mixed evidence, my own planning parameter has to be the 90s. Not because I want to live that long, trust me, but because doing otherwise wouldn't be evidence-based and frankly a bit foolhardy. Yes, I keep the national average around 86 in mind, but that's just one data point. At the population level, I also have to weigh my family's history, personal health, and lived experience to arrive at a more holistic decision that makes sense for me. And this is really how I hope conversations about life expectancy will start to change. Use population level data as a starting point, then adjust it to your own situation. But don't take that same number and apply it wholesale to someone else. Don't judge, don't rant. Honestly, I don't quite know how to feel when I see a man calling a woman overly optimistic for using a longer life expectancy. Brother, she's probably right. So our conversations about life expectancy need to evolve. It is perfectly reasonable for three different individuals to plan around three different life expectancies depending on their individual circumstances. So instead of arguing about the number, ask a better question. What's your plan if that number turns out to be right? Because the underlying logic is often the same. Take CPF Life for example. It's an annuity. It's a longevity hedge. If you believe you'll live long, CPF Life works beautifully. And if you genuinely think you won't make it past 70, then you may choose to do the opposite. Both can be rational. There's no need for everyone to make the same choice. Before I end, I made a brief mention of one important point I'm deliberately not covering today: gender differences for life expectancy and health span. In Singapore, the gap is about 4 to 5 years, and when you translate that into retirement planning like CPF Life, RA top-ups, withdrawal age, the implications are far from trivial. So next week, I'll do a dedicated episode on what that 4 to 5 year gap actually means, especially for married couples and single independent women, and how we might think about top-ups and payout planning more holistically. Thank you for staying till the end of this very long video. I will see you in the next one.